We've had a really terrific response to our invitation. I'll just kick us off and get us started. So ACRE DAOs is a new community. We launched December 1st of last year with an invitation to the worldwide community of people interested in impact investing and regenerative economy to come together in a Web3 way to investigate how can we reimagine impact investing. How might we use the best of Web3 and this emerging coordination tool called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, kind of interrogate what that means in the context of regenerative economies and work that's happening in real space, in real time, and in real communities. Kind of having observed a bit of a disconnect between many of the challenges and opportunities that we're facing as a civilization, as a planet, as sort of local communities, and on the other hand, a crypto economy that's just going gangbusters, and experiments around coordination, decentralization, frictionless transfer of value across space and time. And for a number of us who have been in community around impact and blockchains, and local economic development, how can these things come together, really? And my own sort of story, being based in the Hudson Valley of New York State, so I am calling from about 2 miles north of Manhattan, and being concerned as having been in crypto for quite some time, not seeing the adoption, and that I think we all would love to see the promises and the hopes and the of what this new technology and these new economic models could do, wanting to make that transaction or that transfer real, finding that I was often in conversation around broken business models or stress with local food economy, any number of topics, and many of which we've sort of coined in our Discord around themes, the sort of 7 themes within ACRE DAOs of food insecurity, climate change, of course, education, financial inclusion, health, social justice, and regenerative agriculture, which is going to be our focus for this conversation. So that's sort of a little preview of how we got to this moment, having built a set of tools. I mean, this is just the beginning, a set of tools that can help a decentralized community form and operate and help launch 1,000 ACRE DAOs over the next 1,000 days. So we are taking the approach that's become quite popular in Web3, which is to think about our work together in terms of seasons. And so today is the beginning, or this week really is our kickoff of our first pre-season. And what's going to be involved with that is a bunch of really organizational work among the founding members. So throughout the month of December, many people, many of you on this call, signed up and joined us, and we're going over the next several weeks to be working together to discuss our roadmap as a community and what we want to accomplish in season 1, which will officially kick off in April, and really sort of lay the groundwork for how to move capital, right? Really, at the end of the day, it's about capital markets and new models for sustainable business, for sustainable projects, both globally and locally. And I'm really, really excited to welcome Neal Spackman, who's going to be our guest speaker today. Yay! Hi, Neal. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Amazing. So really glad that you could join us, and I'm gonna hand it over to Neal in just a moment to introduce himself a little bit more in his work. Just a few more housekeeping items just to give a lay of the land of the next hour together. I'm going to ask Paul to speak in a second about our POAPs and how you can get one of those, your proof of attendance for being at this event. Then I'll introduce Neal, and he has a presentation. He's going to speak about his life's work and his new company and their really exciting projects. And in particular, why I was excited to have him join us is that he's actually got some digital assets that are available for purchase. And this being an investment club community, one of the things we're really interested in is like, what can we actually buy with our digital assets that the proceeds of that will have a positive impact in the world. So I thought that Neal and his incredible body of work, and in particular current projects, would just be really great to hear from as a model of some of the things that are going on in the space.
All right, hey everybody. My icon says Spack. That was my high school nickname that stuck around, but you can call me Neal. I've been in the regenerative economy and regenerative development world professionally since 2010. Developed a passion for it around 2006, 2007. And I'm most known for a project that I did in Saudi Arabia. I was recruited to design and direct a project where I was living with tribes of nomads in the desert south of Mecca. This is a region that's got serious desertification due to deforestation and a tragedy of the commons. And I lived with these communities for 2 years, and then my family moved to Jeddah, and I commuted out to these communities for another 6.5 years. And we reversed about a century of desertification in under a decade. We laid a foundation to recreate the indigenous grazing patterns that had been abolished in the 1950s. And I left that in 2018, but I understand from folks in the country that the methodologies we came up with, the systems that we prototyped, have been adopted by 3 different provinces as part of their Saudi Green Initiative programs. So that's what I'm most known for. There's a decent video on YouTube about that called The Story of El Beida, which we can link to in the chat, and that I think Kianga may have forwarded earlier on in some other conversation. I left that project.
I'll post the link in the chat right now as well.
That was a huge adventure and a massive pivot for me professionally. Did a lot of research into indigenous land management systems while I was there, into community development and international development. And one of the things I determined that I needed to do was that I needed to be able to do the same kind of work, but in a for-profit context. Because about a third of my time there was spent fundraising and just asking for the resources we needed to do the work that we were doing. So I went to business school for a year, from 18 to 19, and while there met the people who are my current partners in a company called Regenerative Resources. And I had been working, in the mountains of a very degraded desert landscape. They had, they have decades of experience doing coastal development in coastal deserts and coastal degraded areas. And so when we met, it was like we had found a missing piece of the puzzle for being able to do comprehensive watershed assessment and development. And shortly after meeting, we started Regenerative Resources, which is currently focused on coastal degraded landscapes. All right. So why don't you go to the next slide, and we'll talk through one of the projects that we're currently fundraising for. This is an 8,000 hectare site in Baja California Sur, on the Pacific coast of Mexico. For a reference on scale, this is slightly smaller than Manhattan Island. and we've been in the pre-development phase in this project since for about 3 years now. And what we do is we acquire landscapes like this. You can see the salt pans. You can see, a couple kilometers off of the coast where the landscape turns darker brown. That is a cactus ecology. This place gets almost no rain, generally 60 millimeters on average per year. But there's no photosynthesis on the site. When we were first assessing it, we spent a number of days, and the only animals we saw were a vulture and a coyote, and they were passing through. They were not there to stay. So we look for landscapes like this that are between the ocean and where the next ecology starts, right? This in between space. And why don't you go to the next slide? We transform these landscapes into lush, productive agroecologies using seawater. And I'll talk you through a bit of this. This is, a lot of people assume we're doing desalination. There is no desalination in this system. We are bringing seawater onto the land to create mangrove agroforestries. In Europe, it wouldn't be mangroves, it would be more like marsh. But this is a circular regenerative economic system that in one way can be considered the first regenerative aquaculture. In another way, you could consider it as a platform for establishing new indigenous patterns on these kinds of landscapes. And the way it works is you see that facility looking thing on the lower side of it. That's fairly typical aquacultures that instead of dumping the effluent into the ocean, which is what most of the aquaculture industry does, we are circulating that effluent through this forestry system. And in that forestry system, we can not only produce the bulk of the aquaculture feeds that we need, but also all sorts of seafood, mushrooms, cosmetics inputs, biofuels, animal fodder, algae, and then there's all sorts of value-added products that can come off of that. Let's go to the next slide. So these are some of the things that we can grow, some of the things that we've produced in the past on prototypes of this system. And the business side of this is a mix of real estate, ecosystem services, and these regenerative aquaculture products. That project that you just saw, the one on slide 3, that's a $120 million project. It's a $25 million purchase price of the land, plus about $85-90 development cost. But we estimate that after putting $120 million into this, the land itself will be worth about $400 million. So we're 8 to 20xing the value of the real estate in a decade, depending on the context. We're getting recurring revenues from the sale of goods coming off of it. And on this particular project, we're estimating between 5 and 8 million tons of blue carbon. Net of all the development, right? Because the development has a carbon cost. There's lots of machinery, lots of pumping. We have to put in our own solar power because it's off grid. Why don't you go down to slide 5? So we've been kind of in our own rabbit hole for about 3 years in pre-development phases. Before you can fund a project like this, you have to have access to the land, you have to have permits, you have to have relationships with local communities, you have to have a team that's able to execute on development. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to put that kind of thing together. So we have been in pre-development phases in Ghana, Mexico, Spain, and Namibia. Started in Mexico end of 2018, and these 3 have been some of the leads that came our way and showed enough promise that we decided to put some effort into it. Let's go down to the next one. In Ghana, we're in the Volta Delta region. There's a mess of problems affecting local peoples. It's a mix of erosion, where entire communities are getting swallowed up by the ocean, deforestation, fishery depletion. You've got a lot of coastal communities that are used to catching a lot more fish than they're catching now. And when that happens, they tend to turn to deforestation to make ends meet. So it's deforestation, fishery depletion, really bad erosion, sea level rise, which is driving poverty. And so we have, since for the last year, we've been developing relationships with local communities. We have 4 nurseries run by a women's co-op that we help set up. And what we're targeting here is 6,000 hectares of straight reforestation and 1,000 hectares of that regenerative seawater agriculture, which is how we create jobs that align with ecosystem health and allow people to stop participating in activities that degrade the ecosystem in order to make ends meet. So we're estimating that's a $70 million project. We think the carbon off of this will be about 6 million tons. Plus there were products sold in local markets and some exported to Europe. Go down to the next slide. One of the best things about the work we do is being able to do community day. It's really fun to do these. It always feels there's a huge amount of laying foundation for this stuff to not be a waste of time. But we have grown about 60,000 mangroves in Ghana since June of last year, primarily by volunteers run by the women's co-op that's partnered with. And eventually this will lead to a system where we're able to create jobs and people who are participating in deforestation, or people who are catching the amount of fish that they need to survive. We can bring them in, we can give them employment, we can give them security, we can give them good incomes, and let the fishery rest and let the forest rehabilitate. So we're doing regenerative economic development, which in turn allows for the rehabilitation of degraded ecosystems. Let's go down to the next one. In Mexico, one of the projects that we already have permits for and is underway is a 8,000 hectare mangrove and seagrass restoration project. Phase 1 is 3,300 hectares. We got the permits for this second week of December. So just over a month ago. It took us a year and a half for those permits. But since then, our local project manager, who is an oyster farmer by profession, but he's worked with mangroves locally for 15 years. Why don't you go down to the next slide? You'll see him. This guy on the right is David Bourbon. He's an amateur mangrove ecologist because he's spent 15 years doing little experiments and planting trees on his own or with his wife. So he's our PM, training his neighbors how to restore mangroves locally. And we've been able to do another 50, 60,000 mangroves in a month on this project. This total project cost for this one is going to be about 16 million. We'll grow 12 million mangroves and do, I think, 3,000 hectares of seagrass restoration. We're not sure on the scale of the seagrasses yet. And should sequester 3 to 5 million tons of blue carbon. The other project in Mexico is the one I showed you first, the 8,000 hectare one. That's the size of Manhattan Island. That's a much larger commercial one. And let's go down one more and we'll talk about Spain. A third of Spain is facing desertification, fully a third of the Iberian Peninsula. And in the last 12 months, I visited rice farmers whose production is down 50%. We visited thousands of acres of land that used to be marsh, like the one in this photo here. You can see the river running next to it. That river is very salty because there's a very large tidal swing. So salt water will go 150 kilometers upriver. So the rice farmers can't grow their rice with the river water, and they're out of fresh water. So they're literally half of their rice are fallow this year, and they expect to be more next year. And so we have identified thousands of hectares we could work on in Spain. Let's go to the next slide and see what we want to transform this into. This is a different regenerative seawater agriculture that is based on marsh, halophytes, which are crops that grow in seawater, and multi-trophic aquacultures integrated with seagrass meadows. We can restore this marsh, can do it in a productive way that's producing lots of crops. And the impact we've seen in prototypes we've done here is pretty astounding. In ACRE, my partners did the first commercial version of this regenerative seawater agriculture system from 1999 to 2005. And they saw a 1,000% increase in biodiversity, bird biodiversity alone. They had 20-something species of 20-something species of bird living on site when they started, and just under 250 4 years later. We know that these things sequester carbon at a much faster rate than other terrestrial ecologies. The local climate cooled down by 2 degrees Celsius as a result of that project in Eritrea, and they had 800 employees. They were exporting tons of seafood to the EU every month. And in 2004, I think, it was 2004 or 2005, the Eritrea showed up and nationalized that project, and my partners were invited to leave the country quite quickly, and after being forced to burn a lot of their records. So the impact here is biodiversity and climate, it's temperature, it's economy and jobs, it's income, it's being able to interrupt that poverty degradation cycle that so many rural communities are in right now. And it's creating delicious regenerative seafoods that are helping to heal the planet. So that is a very brief overview of the main system that we are focused on deploying. Our current pipeline, it requires about 250 million of investment. That pipeline includes about 20 million tons of blue carbon, in addition to the real estate gain and the production of foods. And it was about 4 months ago, that I was contacted by Saiful Huq, who is he's not a well-known Hollywood artist, but he's pretty high up there. He was the senior concept artist for James Cameron's Avatar sequels that are coming out later this year and next year. And Saiful had been brought into a project, and he called me and said, "Hey, I want your help with this project in the Middle East." And, we talked through it, and he said, "Well, what's your daily rate?" And I said, "No, I don't want a daily rate for this. I want in some future time for you to donate your skills to our company, to do some kind of project with us." So it was a handshake, kind of I'll scratch your back and you scratch mine agreement. And then he called me in early November and said, "Hey, I'm done with my last project. I want to give you my undivided attention. What are we doing?" And I had no idea what we were doing. But after a few hours of conversation, we decided to launch an NFT project where he would recruit a team of artists that would donate short films and artwork that would directly fund some of these mangrove restoration projects. So let's go down to the next slide. We launched the Harpoon about a month ago. The idea being that we want to attract whales to save the whales. And this is our Web3 hub where we're doing some experiments. We have a lot of ideas about what we could do or what we might do in the future, but we're taking it slow and learning as we go. Let's go down one more slide. So Seifel recruited 2 other artists that he's been working with, and they have created 3 short films that are 20 to 25 seconds apiece. And we are collaborating with 11 Yellow and Chainlink and Regen Network on the development of these films, where these will be sold as NFTs, but the films will only be revealed frames at a time as the NFT is sold and resold, right? So the first person to buy the film will only have 3 to 5 slides, right? Like less than a second of the film. And when that person resells it, then another 3 to 5 slides are revealed. So these will be the slowest releases of a short film ever done. But the idea is to induce the sale and resale of these NFTs, and that the person to purchase the last bit at the highest price will get the full film. So that requires some tricky smart contract engineering. These will be released the end of February. We currently have some preview posters on OpenSea, where if you, just like when you go into a movie theater and you see posters for upcoming movies, that's what these things are supposed to be. But whoever buys the poster gets producer credit on the short film. So these are NFTs that are directly funding mangrove restoration. We have ideas about doing biodiversity credits using some pretty high-tech biodiversity data on sites that we manage. Since we're already going to be developing that data, we can wrap it up in an NFT and then have biodiversity credits where the owner of that NFT gets to see how biodiversity is changing on the sites that we manage. And we've got a lot of other ideas of how to integrate with Web3 and different ways that this can be utilized to support the work that we're doing of restoring degraded ecosystems and creating coastal regenerative economies with seawater. So I'm going to stop there. I think that's been enough of a monologue for everybody. But thanks very much. And it really is a pleasure to be able to speak with you folks and to be invited to this. There are so many new things happening, and I think it's great to see everybody's creativity being channeled into this kind of thing. And there's some really amazing things happening, and I'm excited to see where it all goes. So thanks very much. We'll stop there.
Oh, thank you, Neal. Thank you so much. That was great. I just have one question, and then I'm totally gonna open it up to everyone who's here to ask questions and comment, and we can have a conversation. But I was curious about your comment on working in a nonprofit model and then deciding to go to business school and now operating as a business. And I just wonder if you could share some reflections on that transition and how you found the environment of recruiting investors. I mean, the NFT stuff is interesting, and we're working with it as a kind of supplement, right? But if you could talk about that decision to work in a for-profit model, what you thought was the benefit of going to business school for your work, and how you find the investor climate in terms of a more traditional approach to funding what you're doing.
Yeah. So this is how I think of it. The total amount of philanthropy globally every year is hundreds of billions. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It's hundreds of billions. This number I do remember. Only 2% of all philanthropic monies go towards environmental issues. Right? So we're talking about a total of, single-digit billions going to environmental issues every year from the philanthropic world. Meanwhile, how many trillions of dollars are sloshing around looking for investment? Anybody know? I don't know off the top of my head. It's trillions.
Many trillions.
Yeah, it's many trillions. And so
more every day with our central banks.
Yeah. And so it's, for me, the problems we are trying to address are trillion-dollar problems. And I was like, if I can make this investable so that people feel like they're gonna make money investing in the systems we're building, then there is no limit to the amount of resources we can access to deploy these kinds of solutions, right? I don't think I'll ever be managing trillions of dollars, but I do think we'll be doing multi-billion-dollar projects in 5 to 10 years. And you can't do that with philanthropy. You just can't do it. And so for me, it was, I was tired of being in a professional begging organization when I knew that the value we were creating was much higher than the resources we were getting access to. And B, it was just an awareness of the context, right? That, the regenerative economies generate huge amounts of value, and a fraction of that is financial capital. And so that's how I think about that piece. That's why I decided that it had to be for profit. Because for it to be sustainable, it has to make money. It can't just bring the earth back and bring nature back. It's got to generate income. And then in terms of the investor climate right now, I think our timing is extremely good. Blue carbon is very hot, and it doesn't show signs of cooling down. The awareness around climate and the biodiversity crisis and our effect on the natural world has a lot more urgency now than it did even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? And an example of that is just the concept of regeneration. Like I started using the word regenerative agriculture, I think in 2012, and it felt like there were a dozen of us on Facebook who knew what that term meant. And now it's everywhere, right? Regenerative agriculture is everywhere as a concept. Even massive agribusinesses are greenwashing with it at this point, which means that, as a concept, it has arrived. So I see our timing being very good. And then in terms of investors that we're talking with, it's blended, right? Because there's a real estate component, there's a carbon component, there's definitely an impact component. So there's a mix of investors that we can go to, whether for offtake agreements on the carbon or for the asset management side of things. So we've just started talking with investors. We're just starting to pitch, but we are getting a lot of good feedback and have had verbal commitments from a few whales, actually, that found us because of the NFT project, who have said, yeah, we want to support you. Let us know what you need in the short and medium terms. So the NFT thing is really interesting because ETH, which that'll fund 16,000 mangroves. But the project itself got us the attention of folks like ACRE DAO. We came across your radar because of these NFT things. And we ended up in a Bloomberg article about Web3 and climate because of our NFT project. So the value of this goes way beyond, the actual dollar value of the yen we've sold. It's more that it's put us on the radar of folks that wouldn't have found us otherwise. And there's huge amount of value in that relationship and in that social capital.
Wow, incredible insights. I could ask 100 questions, but that wouldn't be proper because we have a whole community here who I know have questions or comments. So now is the time. Just feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
Oh, Ernesto posted the Bloomberg thing.
Oh yeah, great. Media, you commented in the chat. Do you want to speak about your resonance with that point?
Hey, just want to say congratulations. It's amazing what you're doing. It's very impressive. And I think, yeah, it's the time for this kind of projects to be the spotlight. I think it's the technology and the world is watching, and I think that is everything is it's aligned to to do these kind of projects with the technology. I see like so many ways in how Web3 can help this, like tokenizing assets or doing ventures with DAOs, uh, doing different types of harvest, real harvest, depending on the cycle of each project. And yeah, that's just something that we can discuss like in the channel or something like that. Two questions that I wanted to ask. It's more about the problems of the jurisdiction, like you were saying, like your friends, they got confiscated their land,
Mm-hmm.
and where I come from, that happens like very often, and that's real. How do you
Where do you
see
come
like
from, Paul?
I come from Venezuela,
Hmm.
and then of course I wanted to do projects like this type also in Venezuela, but there's no uh, security at all in real security, like in physical and jurisdiction. There's none
Yep.
of those.
Yep. So
But Spain is a place that I've been watching. I've been doing a lot of research, like exploring with olives, bees, doing like you were saying, like impact also in the land and the community, bringing the locals because you're also providing jobs to the community.
mm,
So how do you see that point, that solution, working with maybe ministries from and governments, applying also for um maybe credits from loans from special loans from Ministry of Agriculture of Spain, something like that. They have flexible rates, so exploring like also what kind of options. And I was curious about how you calculate the, the CO2, the carbon credits. More about if I mean I'm a newbie in that space,
yeah.
so if you can yeah, talk us about more
Yeah,
about
those are
it.
great questions, Paul. Political risk is one of the first things we look at, and there are places that we just won't go. Um, we need a place that has good property rights, that has a good from our perspective, eminent domain set of policies, and that rules out a lot of places where we could build this kind of system, but are not willing to at this point. And my co-founders learned that lesson the hard way. On the other hand, that was where they got their first opportunity to do a commercial scale version of this system. And so, even though it was seized and nationalized, which is very sad, that they still have the experience of once you've built a thing, you learn so many lessons on how it actually works. And so those lessons are still extremely valuable and inform everything that we're doing now. But yeah, it's a massive risk in a lot of places. So there are a lot of places that we won't go. In terms of cooperation with governments, some are more cooperative than others. Uh, some become a lot more cooperative after they've come to an understanding of what we're trying to do. I mean, in Mexico, the Ministry of Environment, which is called Semarnat, they didn't even want to have a meeting with us because they were like, "You want to work with mangroves? No, all the mangroves are protected. No touching the mangroves." Um, and it has taken us 2.5 years of lobbying and finding allies at the local and the regional and the state and the national level to be able to get into the room and sit across from the people who have the kind of authority to allow for this kind of work to happen. So we have done a lot of political work. We're one of my co-founders is a former Swiss diplomat who used to do multilateral economic negotiations on behalf of Switzerland. And so he knows that world extremely well. He is an absolute gem of a partner, but he's the one who's really been leading that process. And it's gotten to a point where it's gone from, we don't want to have a meeting with you, to, we support your development of a first farm. We have authority to collect, transport, grow, and harvest mangroves within the entire state of Baja California Sur. And they have written a formal letter saying that they support the development of our first system and will study it with an eye to deploying it throughout the country of Mexico. So it's a slog. It is an absolute, amount. It's a huge amount of work to develop the political capital needed to do this kind of innovative thing, particularly when land is involved, particularly when you're working with threatened species or endangered species or protected species like mangroves. But in the end, starting out now, we have a huge amount of backing at every level of government in Mexico, which provides much greater security in the long run. And there are different programs that can be accessed depending on, how we structure the operation of the project. And it depends on how big of a project you're doing and who you know and all sorts of things. But there are ways to access that, and we generally rely on local partners to help us navigate those systems and access those kinds of benefits.
Just, hearing the time frame and the work that goes into what you've achieved so far, and where you're going. I wonder if you can talk about the tension that you may see in Web3 and this like very quick culture, and things are moving very fast. There's a lot of instant gratification, certainly around crypto, and we've been in a lot of the same chats in the last several weeks. The refi meme has really taken off, and I think you tweeted the other day about lots of communities popping up, DAOs that are reaching out to you. You can't really kind of copy paste what you've achieved over your years of experience. How do you see us being able to come together, right? Like the kind of focused, long, researched, studied work that you're involved in, and this emerging DAO space, where people have varying levels of experience, various attention spans, various what's your perception, and how can we, if you have any advice to us as a new community that's trying to definitely add value to the space, and particularly around this investment, finding a ways to channel investment dollars toward work such as this.
So I don't know if any of you have an article called The Valley of Death. But it's about the challenge of there's billions of dollars out there to invest in the kind of thing I'm doing. Allegedly, right? I mean, I hear about new funds every week that are being launched to support regenerative ag or to support blue carbon. And I also know a lot of organizations doing projects that are similar to the ones we're doing, and they don't know how to meet in the middle, right? The last 3 years, the first year we just did everything out of pocket. Like I lived on the dregs of my student loans and got a loan from family and friends, right? So the first 12 months, all of us just worked out of pocket. 12 months later, we got an angel investment, a pretty big angel investment that has allowed us to live and get through the pre-development phase of these projects, right? So for the last 3 years, we have really been scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of resources available to us, because these projects are not investable until they reach a certain stage. But to get a project to that stage takes a huge amount of resources. And so I think where the entire industry, let's say, it's not an industry, the entire regenerative, everybody has this challenge. I can't get a project to the point that it's investable because no one's willing to give me the resources to get a project to that point, right? Because from the investor point of view, it's way too risky, right? I mean, if I had been talking with you folks 2 years ago, let's say this was 2 years ago, I don't have access to land, I don't have permits, I don't have a local team, I don't have relationships with the local community. You would look at that and you'd say, okay, this has an extremely high chance of failure. We don't believe we're going to get our money back. So no, it's not de-risked. And that gap is why there are so many projects that aren't getting funded. And at the same time, so many funds and investors who say, I can't find a project to invest in. And I think Web3 I think the people in Web3 are creative enough and experienced enough in finance in general. Like, I think there's enough brain power there to come up with a set of solutions or tools or instruments to that valley of death problem. The other thing I think is that there is a chance to democratize investment into the kinds of things we're doing. Like, I can securitize an investment with the real asset. But that could be tokenized, right? We could split it up and find a way where I get to fund my projects and I don't have to necessarily go to the Inter-American Development Bank or a billionaire family office to get it done, right? Because those are gated communities, let's say, with a lot of hoops to jump through. And it's hard for people like me to access that kind of finance without a warm introduction. So I think there's a lot that Web3 can contribute to this. But I'm not a Web3 expert, nor am I a tech person, nor am I really a finance person. So I have 12, 13 years now in project development and regenerative economies. But there's a whole set of expertise that folks in your community have and other DAOs have that I'd love to have just your brain power in on these problems and say, okay, here's what we think could be done. And then, that process of iteration happens, that process of creativity happens, and we come up with a way to unlock both the people that have the funds and they're looking for the projects and the projects that just want to get started can't access that finance until they've been through a pre-development phase.
Well, it's so well said. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what we're hoping to do, and with our community and this beginnings of operating in this mode, so much of which is being written or being, as some people say, sort of like building with the garage door open. Or I've thought about like, we're going in a high bullet speed train and like throwing the tracks out in front of the train as it's moving. But I thought your response was, really quite optimistic, which is not that the speed at which we're operating in this space as necessarily a negative or a challenge or problematic in terms of the slow returns or the slow work sometimes of regenerative investing, but rather that there's this gap. You called it the valley of death, was it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're uniquely suited to bridge that valley, both in terms of kind of, I guess, the democratization of capital flows that can come in and also inhabit a different space of expectation in terms of return. And you spoke about the social dynamics that the NFTs and the visibility, and I'm really excited that that's an area we can tap into right away, right? I mean, I have a background as an attorney, and so I'm always thinking about regulation. And as we launch a project like that, how do we have the kind of flexibility and the openness that we want to have to bring as many people in, and stay on the right side of, say, securities laws. And so this community space and the social value and the tokenization, the way you've approached it and the way a lot of folks are in the space, seems like, really, really so genius. And I loved how you talked about making this film unfold as the asset is changing hands. So it's exciting to be a part of that work, and I feel we could really hopefully be part of scaling that, and that for the pre-season, just to give folks on the call another sense of our roadmap and what we're doing here at ACRE DAOs is, so much of the organization and coordination work of how to operate in this manner, and how to bring more people into the pipeline, and certainly with our founding members, looking to recruit among you who are token holders, really putting a team and a process and some goals in place, and of how we can scale this work, workshopping even on the financial product side. How exactly can some of these financial instruments be structured to help those investors who need much more meat on the bones, I guess. When you spoke about things being investable,
Yep, that's
that just, they need metrics, they need, so this is I think imminently solvable, and that I'm excited that we're all on this call right now with, I think, an interest in different aspects of that, and we can all maybe leverage those talents in a new way than in the old sort of siloed, everyone's within their organization, everyone's within their community, and we're sort of limited in how we can figure out how the pieces can come together.
That'd be amazing. That would be amazing. We've been able to do it because we got our angel, right? But the only reason we got our angel is because we have the Albeda project and greening Eritrea under our belts, right? We've done this and we've proven ourselves, so we have a certain amount of experience and clout that a lot of other folks don't have, particularly when we're talking about smaller projects. I mean, we're talking about millions of tons of carbon that are valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Most folks aren't at that level, and they're talking about, much smaller scale or much more within the community and community-oriented thing. And I'm blessed enough to have the access that I've got. Most folks don't have that. And so it's extremely difficult to get this stuff going. But the impact and the results are they're world changing. They're absolutely phenomenal.
Well, Neal, thank you so much and congratulations. And this is really our honor to have you as a guest for our first call of the year. And I just so much wanted to have you come in particular because of all that you've achieved. And as I've been in so many conversations about the potential, I just thought, you were something that I've started to point to of like, oh, this is what it looks like. This is what it can look like. And you've been so creative with with where the digital Web3 and where kind of NFTs can come into play. And so it's just great to have what you've already achieved as a model and example, for a lot of people that we talk to outside of the space, who we definitely want to bring into this type of impact investing conversation. There's so much friction, of course, like kind of like we're on this app called Discord, which is not intuitive for lots of people.
Yeah, it should be called Harmony, right? Shouldn't it be called Harmony instead of Discord?
I know. I don't know. Well, before we wrap for the evening, is there anyone who wants to make a final comment or ask a question? Well, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to do these once a month. So the last Thursday of every month, we'll have another community call. And certainly as we progress in the preseason, we'll have more sort of business of ACRE DAOs to share in terms of what's happening, what's coming next, our plans for admitting new members, the different roles that we have available. If you're interested in being a contributor and helping us with our mission statement, our plans, and how we're going to launch 1,000 ACRE DAOs or support people who are doing this kind of work, and importantly, figure out how to, regenerate the way capital markets work. That's part of the mission here as well.
Here we go. Thanks so much, Kianga. Thanks to Ernesto for the help on the tech stuff. And, it's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure. The pleasure's ours. Well, everyone, get your POAPs, and we'll see you in the Discord. Have a good evening, good morning, good rest of the day for everybody. Bye.